Hey everyone, Ryan here at Lakeside Studios. Welcome back to Heavy Reflection. Today's topic concerns signature guitar gear, what makes a good signature product, what makes a bad signature product, and why a lot of the times I end up recommending against those signature pieces of gear, though there are certainly exceptions to that rule, just like there is with anything else. So, of course, when I'm talking about signature products, I'm talking about stuff like this Wild Overdrive by MXR, something that an artist has endorsed. They put their name on it, generally has maybe a different paint job if it's like a pedal or a guitar. Maybe they put different pickups in it versus a stock model. But most of the time you can tell that it has the artist's spin on it, whether it be aesthetically or in terms of the construction under the hood. Like most guitar players, a healthy majority of my gear is simply stock off-the-shelf stuff that you can get from sweetwater.com or from Amazon or find used on eBay, maybe at your local pawn shop, where, there's no artist's name attached to it. This is mostly mass-produced or fairly mass-produced items. Of course, we do get into some of the boutique stuff like Fortin pedals, and I do have, one or two custom pieces, like with the NOF Customs guitar that I received recently. But for the most part, I think only about a dozen or so items I have are actually signature products that have an artist's name on them that are endorsed by a different company. So the reason that is because, honestly, I really don't like the premise of signature gear anyway. I'm okay with it in a lot of instances. I think it really works and it makes sense as a collaboration between a player and a company, especially when you're already using their stuff. But like most things with a consumer industry, it's been bastardized to hell and back. And now we're to the point where a lot of signature products or a custom piece of gear may be indistinguishable from something you take off the shelf and just put a different paint job on it. So that's kind of the phenomenon I wanted to discuss today. Though I think it's important to get at least one of my major biases out of the way. I do have a hang up when it comes to stuff like signature amplifiers or signature guitars when they're played by other people. It's a weird thing, but if I go see an original band, someone that's playing their own music, and a guy rolls up with like a Zakk Wylde 2203 half stack and like a James Hetfield snakebite guitar, then my first thought is like, well, how derivative are you? How uninspiring is your music if you can't come up with something on your own or get the sounds you want out of stock gear? Again, that's a completely subjective bias on my part, but that's why, I don't like to have a signature amp head. That's why I don't play someone else's signature guitar. Although with that point in particular, the lines are blurred in terms of what is a signature and what is a stock product, because we have a lot of guitar companies like Wild Audio, which is a guitar I own, and it looks like something Zakk would play because he does play that brand, but it's really a Schecter guitar that's been rebranded. You got stuff like Ole England Solar guitars, you got Abasi Concepts, you got Rob Chapman. So a lot of what is signature and what's not, at least in terms of what the public perceives, has been blurred. So I think let's start with what makes a good signature product in my eyes. And I think I will use the Moore Ocean Machine, the Devin Townsend signature delay, reverb, delay, looper, pedal, all wrapped up in one as kind of the poster child of what I think makes a really good signature product. For my money, a signature guitar, pedal, or amplifier really has to meet the same kind of criteria as a stock pedal or guitar or amp to be worthwhile buying, or hell, even exist in this oversaturated guitar gear market we're already in. But I am admittedly a little more lenient when it comes to full-blown originality. A lot of this gear will be based on stuff that the artist had played previously in their career. They're certainly aligned to that. I, wouldn't expect someone who plays a stock SG standard to roll up and say, yep, this is my signature. I'm just going to throw my signature on the headstock and we're done. That's a little far, but for a lot of this stuff, I'm not expecting Devin Townsend and Moore to have come up with a million different delay and reverb models that are brand new. Ultimately, I'm looking for a standout feature set. I'm looking for good value for your dollar, competitive pricing in the range that this product exists, for the timing to be right. For instance, with the John Petrucci signature JP2C amplifier, that's essentially like you put a couple Mark IIc pluses together in one head. Is it really original? No, not really, but he did get Mesa Boogie to release an updated version of a classic amplifier. Plus he put a lot of his own tweaks, bells and whistles, has 2 EQs. I think that's a wonderful signature product because they were able to take something from their company's lineage, make it modern, updated, and it's something that Petrucci uses religiously. So I think that's another good example of a signature product. With this, I really love the Ocean Machine because it takes what a lot of Devin Townsend has done over the past few decades in his career, and ultimately neither Moore nor Townsend let the marketing hype engine go too far. They simply touted this as a great tool, and a great tool it is. For the money, for the ease of use, for the form factor, for all the features, the sound quality, you simply don't have another product like this on the market that can do it all. And that's what I really appreciate about these kind of signature products. They bring something that does not exist anywhere else. And for that, I can certainly live with having a now defunct group's signature or name on a pedal. That's, a fine compromise for me. And the cool thing about this is Townsend actually uses it all the time. And it's on the new album Empath. And I think an even cooler thing is that he's simultaneously able to say, yeah, this is an amazing piece of gear, but he still uses other stuff from whether it be Earthquaker devices or an Ibanez Tube Screamer, yada, 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 because ultimately it is a tool. And that's what I like to see from signature gear. Someone that says, I need something that solves this problem and I want it to be accessible to more people. This is what embodies a great signature in my opinion. I'm also a fan of what Fishman's done with their Artist series of Fluence pickups, having of course previously worked with Devin Townsend and Tosin Abasi of Animals as Leaders. That is the set I have in my 8-string. There's a Stephen Carpenter set, now a Keith Merrow set, and I really like what they do because there's some high value for your dollar in all of those products. You get basically 3 different voicings, all of which sound extremely convincing and high quality. They're a little different to dial in my experience, but they all sound really great. You got a modern kind of EMG sound, you have a more passive humbucker sound, and then an extremely convincing real single coil stuff, and all of which are in kind of the same playing field in terms of output, so you really don't have to adjust much for that. And more importantly to me, you can actually tell a difference between a lot of them, whereas a lot of signature, like EMG sets, I'd be hard pressed to tell the difference between an EMG stock 81, the Het 81, and Zakk Wylde signature 81. Have a strong feeling, there's really not much there. And I suppose that brings us pretty comfortably into the gray area of guitar gear, where you might find some really good value stuff, and a lot of it is bound to sound great. But much of it is so derivative that you'll question if it deserves to exist on this already crowded market. And some of it is literally just a stock product with a different paint job. And with that, I suppose I'll discuss this MXR Wild Overdrive again. If you saw a previous episode of Pedalhead, you'll have seen that this pedal and this pedal are virtually identical. We're talking like 2 or 3 components difference. They're the same circuit. In fact, you can modify a stock Super Overdrive with a couple capacitor changes, a couple resistor changes, and I think you short one part of a circuit, and it is identical to this pedal. Now, at the time when this came out, this wasn't necessarily that egregious of a product because MXR didn't have a like-for-like Super Overdrive competitor. With Zakk Wylde being a previous Super Overdrive user and being endorsed by MXR, it was kind of a smart move, I feel, to have the Wild Overdrive basically be a Boss Super Overdrive. That sort of practice still very much goes on today, but a lot of the times now it's still within the same company or same product line. So on yet another previous episode of Pedalhead, I took a look at the Fort and Grind pedal and compared it to the Friedrich Thorndahl Signature 33 Boost. And what we found is that not only is it on the same identical PCB, not only are the circuits like for like, minus 1 component value on the 33, the EQ curves are, for all intents and purposes, what I would consider to be interchangeable, with the variance between the two something that I cannot scientifically chalk up to any significant differences in the pedal designs themselves. They kind of get lost in the whole component tolerances differences and stuff that I would expect to see in 2 stock Ibanez Tube Screamers that you pulled off the production line. So without actually measuring each individual component, from what I can tell, these are more or less the same pedal with some minor tweaks. And that's something you'll see a lot of the times. In this case, I didn't necessarily find the 33 all that egregious of a product because number one, it was a limited run deal. There's only 100 or so of these out there. To me, that's totally acceptable. This could have been any other limited edition release of another Fort and Grind with a different aesthetic, or any pedal for that matter. And even more importantly, the upcharge wasn't really that significant. This thing costs like $5 or $7 more than this. So as someone who's a fan of the band and who likes collecting that kind of stuff, then I think that's reasonable. What I did not find acceptable was the marketing that kind of spun this as its own unique product and conveniently left out that it's basically a grind pedal with a different paint job. And that's a lot of the stuff you see that I really don't like about signature gear. And if these companies advertise it that way, if they called a spade, then I would have really no problem with it at all. I don't care how many times you repaint a Steve Vai guitar. I don't care if ESP says, okay, here's our stock single cut from this line. We're going to repaint it and put some new pickups in it. And now this is the James Hetfield signature, and we're going to charge you another $150 for the difference between the pickups and whatever other, manufacturing steps that went involved. And that's totally fair. Give the consumer an idea of what they're actually buying, and it's up to them at that point. Of course, that's not the way it works. And that practice is certainly not exclusive to guitar. You see rebadging, rebranding all the time, paying for something that is more or less identical with a couple of tweaks and upcharging for it. Even then, with all else equal, let's say that you take a signature product and its non-signature equivalent. And once you compare them, you ultimately arrive at the conclusion that dollar for dollar, they're pretty much the same. Maybe this one costs a few bucks more, but maybe it also gives you some features that you think are worth having. So you're really spending a similar amount of money to get the same kind of value. To me, that's a double-edged sword, and it's just as big of a problem as being a direct ripoff, because you are at that point clogging the market even further. Do we need multiple pages of two Screamer derivatives with all kinds of signatures on them? I think not, because for a lot of people, they just aren't going to care. While I might be interested in some of the minutia we're discussing with different pedals, and hell, even maybe I think it's worth having a couple derivatives of one overall design, a lot of people simply won't. They don't care. They don't have the time or the interest to get invested in this sort of thing, and you shouldn't need to get a good guitar sound, because a lot of this stuff kind of does the same thing anyway, and if companies would simply advertise it as what it is, then that wouldn't really be that problem. And while intercompany competition is certainly a good thing for consumers, I think it's equally dangerous when the same company puts out multiple derivatives of what is essentially the same product. It kind of goes back to that confusion through option paralysis, and cell phone companies in the US absolutely love to do that. It's getting bad with video games now as well, where you'll have 15 different versions of that. Cell phone companies will send you, oh, here's our 85 different plans with a freaking Excel table so you actually know what it does, but all this fine print about overages and data caps and all this crap that, it's just too much. It's too much to take in. And if you're just a guy that wants to find a decent distortion or overdrive pedal, when you see all these different signatures, when you see all these different companies that are doing the same thing, it can become option paralysis. None of the gear that I'm discussing in this group is necessarily bad gear in its own right. A lot of it is actually great, and it's going to sound good. It'll probably do what you want it to do. My problems with it is that a lot of it is just simply too derivative for it to be a necessary thing to exist. It's clogging up a already concentrated market, and if it's marketed wrong, it can really be anti-consumer in the way that I view it. Unfortunately for this next group of what I will call the bad signature gear, that doesn't really apply. I think a lot of this stuff is just straight up awful and doesn't need to exist. And my biggest pet peeve, I think, is really summed up with the PRS Silver Sky, the John Mayer signature. And I actually discussed this topic recently with Leon Todd, so if you missed that series of videos, I'd highly recommend you check it out, some interesting stuff. But we arrived at the same conclusion with this thing, that ultimately it's probably one of the best playing Strat guitars ever out there. It definitely sounds great. I'm sure it feels wonderful and plays like a dream. It's an American-made PRS, so obviously they have some quality behind them. The problem is it would be like if Fender had an artist that they endorsed, and that artist said, I want my signature to be a Gibson SG. So they go over, they take a Gibson SG and they slap a Fender headstock on it, and that's their signature. Just kind of weird. Taking someone else's stock product and making it a signature just so you can be endorsed by a certain other company. That's not terribly common, but it does happen. And I think the Silver Sky is like the most recent one that just made me absolutely facepalm. Not only that, the bigger problem is the value just simply isn't there. It costs, really in the same ballpark, if not more, than a lot of high quality Fender Strats that have been out there for 50, 60 years. So ultimately, it's just an endorsement deal that I really don't see the point in paying for. You could also maybe say that a lot of the Super Strat players from decades past did a similar thing with the companies they endorse, but at least in those cases, I would say their instrument stands out from a stock Stratocaster. If I'm standing 30 feet, hell, 30 yards away, I can tell the difference. And they also stand out from the stock offerings from the company they're endorsing, which is kind of bare minimum criteria for a signature in my book. So I'll give those a pass for sure. Not to mention the instruments feel very different and look different, different contours and all these things that make a Super Strat very different from a stock Stratocaster. But honestly, I don't really feel the need to discuss any other examples. The Silver Sky kind of nails it, and what I feel is just like the most unnecessary signature ever made. So in conclusion, I'm certainly not opposed to signature gear. I actually love the concept of it because the artist has, an unparalleled opportunity to bring unseen value or feature sets or a combination thereof into something that would really make people's lives easier, or that would be a cheaper way to go versus something else, or a higher sound quality versus a competing product. I just think it's abused a lot of the times, and a lot of times it's unintentional, but we're clogging up an already crowded market with a lot of this stuff, and some of it just straight out just does not need to exist. And with as much transparency as companies could give nowadays, with as much information that's out there, it's just still frustrating to see how much they intentionally hide back for those reasons that we discussed earlier. Like I said, I am more drawn to the pedal side of things, though I would have no problem playing a less branded signature amp head like the Randall Satan from Ola England. I don't really have a problem with one little, signature symbol there. But with that said, I think that the better way to go for a lot of these players nowadays, instead of being endorsed, is their own self-made companies. I really enjoy what Solar Guitars is doing. I wish Bossy Guitars better success than they've had in their first year of startup, but so far looking like things are getting a little bit better. That affords the artist a lot more room for creativity, making something that they really want to make, because a lot of companies, they don't want to stray too far from the tools, the machinery they already have set up for stock models. So I think it's a great thing overall, and I think that's what we're going to be seeing more and more of. It can maybe get tiring, like, oh God, great, another guitar player has their own company, but I think it's a net benefit, and I'll be happy to see them cutting more and more into the, more mainstream types of brands. I think overall it's a good thing. So that's kind of my feelings on signature gear. They can be awesome, they can be really garbage, and I don't think, at least in terms of bigger name players, we're going to be seeing, at least in the next few decades, that much signature stuff by big companies. I have a strong feeling many of the upcoming prominent players will likely do their time for 5 to 10 years under more recognizable brands before moving on to their own ventures, likely having their stuff manufactured by maybe some of those bigger name brands, like Horizon Devices being made by MXR or Wild Audio being made by Schecter Guitars. And again, that's a future that I'm very in support of, because it's more diversity, and as long as they're doing something that is worth having, a product worth existing, then it's certainly a thumbs up for me, because it's not signature and I'll be more likely to buy it. So that's about it for today's Heavy Reflections. Any questions, comments, as always, leave them down below. Try to get back to them. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.